Today, we've come down to Hampshire to meet up with James Cameron, who's the boss of Mission Motorsport and an avid car nut. Amongst his collection is an old Dodge that had its 100th birthday this year, so naturally, we took it to the pub.
I'm a car guy. I was lucky that 15 years ago I had the foresight, or just happened to be in the right place in the right time, to have an interest in 1970s Porsches that nobody else really particularly liked. And so I tend to get associated a little bit with Porsches because of, sort of things like the Carrera 3 litre behind us. But I'm not really a Porsche guy. I'm a car guy. I love things that move you, both literally and figuratively. I think I got a bit of it from my parents, but I've always really loved engineering and motion and movement and things like that. And it was part of that's what drove me to join the forces. I really loved my aeroplanes and things like that when I was at school, and at one point thought that was the way that I was going to go. And in the end, it was tanks was the thing that kind of got us. When I was a student, you could afford to actually do motorsport. If you're talking about an old Series 3 Land Rover and knocking over bamboo poles in a wood somewhere, just outside Bradford, that was right up my street. I loved it. And so a lot of my early cars, there was a lot of sort of Series 3, 2A Land Rovers and things like that. At the beginning of university, I think by the time I was emerging out of the end of university, I got a little bit more eclectic. I nearly turned up at Sandhurst in a 1977 Camaro, which was the ideal car for the young man about town. But I'd ended up with a Camaro because I'd swapped it for the car I had before. Well, car was the loose phrase. Was a 1965 ex-German Army crew cab Unimog that really took the whole off-roading thing to an extreme. And I used to turn up to heavy vehicle trials at Stanhope and places like that, and you see other people just going, oh, and then going home as I turned up in this Unimog. Amazing things, just really cool stuff. Racing became a thing a wee bit later on. Started with sort of Harewood hill climb and things like that, and then went on to proper sort of circuit racing. Stuff I look back on fondly, because it's amazing how when you get older, life kind of gets in the way. It's a big day for us today because I'm overcoming, it's like 2 years of inertia in order to get this girl out behind us, because she's quietly turned 100 while nobody's been watching, and that's special.
The Dodge is powered by a flathead 3.5 litre 4-cylinder engine that produces a claimed 35 horsepower. It's mated to a 3-speed non-synchro manual gearbox that takes some practice to use, believe me. Despite its size, it only weighs a little over a ton. And it's glorious.
It was going to the Le Mans Classic in 2012. So these are really early days of Mission Motorsport, the charity. But our patron, Derek Bell, introduced us to this lunatic, I think is the best way to describe him, called Martin Overington. And Martin's had a Bentley blower, 1929, blower Bentley, some race provenance, which he was going to race at Classic Le Mans, and he'd managed to persuade Derek Bell to go and share the car with him. The paddock of these sort of old agricultural open-wheeled jalopies I was a bit sceptical about. And of course, when we arrived, the very first thing we had to do was fix the car that had decided to throw something complicated. So the very first jobs we were doing, rolling up our sleeves and getting stuck in. And the Bentley and things like Bugattis, wonderful things to drive, but they're quite intimidating to drive. You've really got to learn to do it. And it's because the pedals are in a different order. Sounds nuts. But clutch, brake, accelerator wasn't that way for everything from the beginning. And a lot of things, particularly European things, had the throttle in the middle. The Americans, weirdly, Dodges like this thing and Buicks from the 1920s put the pedals into what we would consider the right order: clutch, brake, accelerator. Put the controls on the inside, so they're less like chitty chitty bang bang and you're leaning outside doing things. And it sort of really sparked my interest, because it was the early American stuff that were going to be the first things that turned 100 years old, that perhaps were actually approachable to own by somebody who isn't a mechanical genius or a spannering god or anything else, and is probably going to leave things parked up for long periods of time with no maintenance and then expect them to work. So I think it was a Brightwell's auction that was held at Bicester Heritage, and I was lightly wandering through and showing a bit of interest in some of the things, and seeing some really characterful cars, lots of patina, of different sort of shapes and sizes that were about the right sort of thing that I thought I was looking at. And then one of them that really didn't look like the others, because it looked like a new car. Zero patina, absolute full restoration that had been done on this Dodge. But one of the other things about it was it didn't have wooden wheels. Wooden wheels, absolutely typical for everything of that age, are fantastic. They work really well. But you need a mate who's a wheelwright if you leave them stood up for a long time. So as you park the thing up over winter, people jack them up and put them on. I haven't got time for that sort of stuff. And mine had the rare alloy wheel option, using a fantastic alloy of steel called pig iron. They had these disc wheels, which was a genuine option for these cars from the factory. And this car was kind of fitted with it. And so I was kind of interested. So I made a really stupid bid that came in under what the owner wanted for it. A conversation after the auction, when the thing hadn't sold, resulted in me suddenly being the proud owner of a car that was about 95 years old, and that was sort of 5 years ago. Obviously, I set off enthusiastically from Bicester back in the direction of the Mission Motorsport workshops, and I didn't even get around Bicester. Got rescued by a friend. And I started the process of 1920s motoring, by which you will arrive at your destination, just not necessarily in the hour that you expect to, and sometimes not even the day or the calendar month. But you will get there, and you'll make a lot of friends with people along the way, when inevitably it peters out and you have to stop and figure out which particular bit of 1920s tinkering you need to do to get it going again. It's a touring car made by Dodge Brothers in Detroit, and this car would have come off a production line that looks very different to the production lines we see these days in Detroit back in 1923. Back then they were offering more colours than Henry Ford were doing, but this car is one of that example of those millions of cars that were produced by the Americans in the early 20s that then went all the way across the world. Lots popped up in Australia and things like that. The change to it has been that it's on a 12-volt system instead of the original 6-volt, which is a fairly straightforward swap to make. But when this thing was properly restored, they swapped the electrics out for a 12-volt system as well, which just makes it a lot easier to use on a regular battery and charge and all of those things. My plan was that I would buy something that was absolutely pristine and needed absolutely nothing, and that was incredibly naive. But the reality is, it's needed absolutely nothing. A fan belt, it threw, and one of the door handles fell off on a roundabout, and I actually sort of saw it go, or I saw that something had gone, and went back a few hours later and retrieved it out of the verge, brought it back, screwed it back on again. I've done nothing major to it. The only thing you tend to do is tinker in order to kind of make things work. Had a carb float that didn't float, it sank. So you ring up Berlin, who go, well, you know, I'm pretty sure we've got a range of carb floats that will kind of work for it. And, you know, within moments it's sorted, and there's a carb float that then works for it. So you've got to kind of keep on top of these bits and pieces. But broadly speaking, the kind of beauty of it is that it just sort of works, theoretically. You know, getting it to turn over and things like that, you're moving an awful lot of. I think it's a bit like a 944 in that you've got a massive four-pot up at the front. So they must be like paint pots going up and down inside the cylinders. Very low compression, quite a lazy engine, really. Doesn't make a lot of power. In terms of speed, I think there's a certain amount of oscillation, so you take the average of what it's showing you. Anything over about 45 miles an hour is frankly terrifying. And to be honest, that's not really where it's happiest, so it tends to potter along at a speed just below that. But when it'll go, it'll just do it forever, and it tootles along. So it's absolutely perfect. This is the best car in the world for going to the pub in. The absolute best thing about the Dodge is the way it makes people feel. People's response to it is extraordinary, absolutely amazing. And so, I mean, it's been out and done film shoots and things like that. Filmed a thing for the BBC in Harrow, where in between sort of shots, there was a bit of, I also needed to give it a bit of a run, so I went for a tootle around Harrow. And people fall off the pavement as you go past, you know, waving at you, just absolutely astonished. Young, old, it really doesn't matter. Everybody kind of loves it because, you know, what you're seeing is a piece of history going past. And you're also seeing something which is patently ridiculous. And I think everybody kind of responds to that. Because if you turn up in one of those things, there's a bit of, yeah, you know, good work. That took commitment to get that here, you know. So it's the way it makes people feel. For me, having managed to make it work, one of its first trips it did, my Auntie Dickie's now 91. And a couple of years ago, she was turning 88. And I picked her up unexpectedly. She wasn't expecting at all, in the Dodge, and went to go and took her for a drive in something that made her feel young because it was older than her. And the absolute joy, so I've got some pictures of that, and the absolute joy which she had, open road, one of these things, is just fantastic. And if you can bottle that, that really is a wonderful thing to do.